Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I am your host, Brad Whipple, and welcome to part 2 of our coverage for From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back from Del Rey Publishing. If you haven't already listened to part 1 with Amy Rickow, you can go do so at this point, but we are going to be covering chapters 14 through 27 in this part. As always, once again, Sarah, welcome back to part 2 with me.
Hello, hello. I am glad to be back and talking more about this lovely, lovely book.
So excited. And for part 2, we are joined by a very special guest. It is Maggie Lovitt from the Star Wars Friends podcast. Maggie, welcome to Friends of the Force, first timer.
Yes, thank you so much for having me again, or for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, I was like, maybe I've had you before. I could have forgotten easily because I drink too much beer, and that's okay sometimes. But
what a 2020 mood.
Well, welcome to the show, Maggie. So excited to have you. And before we get started, I would love to hear a little bit about kind of your place in the Star Wars community, what you do over at the Star Wars Friends show, and what our listeners should know about you before we get started.
So I started podcasting because of the Star Wars Friends podcast. Chris invited me to be a guest back in January, and he had invited me back earlier in like December, and I was like, no, it's not really my thing. And he kind of like wore me down, and I was like, fine, I'll try this podcasting thing. I ended up becoming a co-host of the podcast in May on May the Force. Because of that, I've also started my own podcast talking about historical dramas, and then I decided to start a YouTube channel as well because, you know, Twitter is not the only place I can run my mouth about Star Wars. And then I also write over at Your Money Geek. I'm the managing editor of entertainment over there, and I mostly talk about Star Wars.
Seems like you're just talking a lot about Star Wars, and we love to see it. So congrats to all the cool projects you're doing. I think the YouTube channel is definitely kicked off. We need more positive YouTube channels because YouTube is often just a cesspool of hatred.
Oh, it's terrible.
There's some scary stuff you can find on there. So thank you for being a good presence on youtube.com. So very excited to have you. And I'm just over the moon about this book in general. And as we've discussed before, Sarah, we have just such great impressions of it and all of the different work on it. I think part 2, the chapters we'll be covering have a pretty unique perspective, or a unique point of view more so than the first part. A lot more mystical things that are happening, some more creative stories in terms of, you know, Daniel Jose Older's Stet, which is written from a more editorial copywriter perspective. There's just a lot of different stuff going on in this portion of the book, and I'm very excited. So, Maggie, I'd love to get your thoughts before we get started. Since Sarah and I have already kind of given our overall view on the book, and we'd love to kind of bounce off of what you think. What's your initial review of this book? What worked for you? What didn't? What surprised you? All that good stuff.
Well, I love this book. I thought it was such a great glimpse into The Empire Strikes Back. My favorite story really surprised me. I ended up really loving Hunger, which is the story about the Wampa. And like it reduced me to tears, which was like entirely unexpected. But I feel like I ended up liking most of the same authors that I was already familiar with. Jason Fry, Gary Whitta, Daniel. So in that regards, I was kind of expecting that to happen. I had initially been really excited about Hank Green writing a story for this book, and I ended up not liking his story, and I don't know why, and I feel really bad about it because I was so excited about him being able to like participate in Star Wars, but I guess it is what it is. I think what's nice about this book is that there's a story for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether you love the main characters or the side characters or creatures, you had something that was going to make you happy.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is something for absolutely everybody. I feel that any Star Wars fan could pick this book up and find a story that they really love. And what I love so much about hearing your impressions of the book is that I kind of had an opposite experience in the sense that a lot of the authors that I was particularly excited for, whose Star Wars work I've really loved in the past, were not the stories that captured me in some of the ways that authors who were completely new to me did. And so while I enjoyed just about every single story in this edition, I was really thrilled about the new authors whose work I really, really loved, and will definitely be seeking out their other stories as well.
And that's kind of the wonderful part about this anthology is you do, I think you almost gravitate towards those new perspectives and those new writers because it's so unfamiliar to us and it captivates us a little more. And I kind of feel more of the same way you did, Sarah. I think I was really attaching myself to a lot of the newer writers in this book, and that's kind of the wonderful part about, from a certain point of view. And Maggie, that's sort of my next question for you is, what do you feel that these sorts of anthologies represent or add to the Star Wars universe? Why is it important that this book was made in the first place? That's kind of always my question when a book comes out is why? Not in a mean way, just kind of like I want to get to the root of why this book is being made, who it's for, what it's adding, because not every book is gonna land, but I think this series in particular has landed, through its first two installments.
As an expanded universe fan, I think that for me, I like these anthologies because it expands on the new canon or what still exists as canon. And, as Star Wars as an entire fandom, we love gobbling up new stories and new characters and new perspectives. And so I think that's what's really neat about these stories. And I think it was Jason Fry that posted a funny thing about, the next 50 years of Star Wars anthologies. And I was sitting there and I was like, I might not be alive for these. And it made me really sad because I'm like, I love these anthologies. And like, I want to hear like, what was it, BB9's, the little Imperial droid. I want to know his point of view. I want to know him reacting to Kylo Ren destroying the elevator. And so it was just, I think that's what I like about these stories is they're not serious. They're just fun. And you can either accept it as canon or just move on.
Yeah, you really can either take them or leave them. And that's what makes it kind of fun, because if a story didn't resonate for you, you're like, okay, that I read that. Did it happen in the universe in my mind?
Nope.
No, that's okay. But yeah, I did see that tweet and just laughed. I was like, oh man, I'm going to be old as heck, sitting with my library of Star Wars books I've been collecting since the early 2000s. And I'm like waiting for the next, from a certain point of view release, for The Last Jedi or whatever. And I kind of hope we're all alive. Actually, I do hope we're all alive to read those books. And I know, I think Tom from Del Rey tweeted oh God, this gave me a racing heart. And yeah, I bet they're a little stressful to put together, but they certainly are a ton of fun.
Yeah, I just imagine you with your giant bookshelf of Star Wars books over, 70 to 80 years, and your grandkids are just like, what did it cost? And you're just like, everything.
No, they'll be like, can I pick up this book? And I'll be like, no, that's my nice copy.
It's still it's a first print. I just gotta say, where was my 2018 from a certain point of view holiday special, Del Rey? Where is that at? I'm just saying, it's Life Day yesterday. I would love an itchy story. Maybe we'll get one in Return of the Jedi, from a certain point of view. Kashyyyk was originally supposed to be part of Return of the Jedi. Anyways, I digress. Although, Maggie, you bring up a good point about the elevator. I would love a certain point of view story of Kylo Ren's helmet. That thing had to go through quite a beating.
Oh my gosh.
So I want to.
Can we start petitioning for you to write that?
Helmets have feelings too. I'm just saying, that thing was just left on the ground, not to be repaired for a whole nother movie. God, I feel bad for it.
Oh, that poor helmet.
Oh my God.
Sarah, you love that scene too. Anyways,
That is my favorite scene in Star Wars, probably.
Well, we're going to get off track very quickly here if we go down that rabbit hole. And is it a fun rabbit hole to go down? So, yeah, Maggie, do you have any other thoughts overall on the book before we really get into the chapters?
I will say I really enjoyed the diversity of the authors. That, it was a really great mix of new authors and, well-loved authors. And they really are trying to, I think, make Star Wars more inclusive and to include more stories from points of views that haven't been discussed previously.
Yes, absolutely. Because publishing is a long game, right? You can wait years and years to get even just 10 new authors to write stories. So to get 40 all at once, many of whom are new, is quite a gift. because many of these people may never write Star Wars again. Some might return. I expect many will. So with that being said, let's just get right into it, and we'll start with For the Last Time by Beth Revis. So I was very excited to see Beth return to the Star Wars universe. She wrote Rebel Rising, which I just read over the summer. It is incredible. If you love Jyn Erso, absolutely read Beth's book, because it takes you through, like, it's kind of like a coming of age story, but for Jyn Erso, and like what it feels like to live with a ragtag group of rebels, led by Saw Gerrera. So she definitely brought a very gritty perspective. Her story from this anthology is really just about how fear trumps all other instincts, and there's two types of power, power you take and power you're given. And I love the whole idea of Piet seeing Vader under the mask, what it really means to be inside that suit, and almost how he sees him as a more pitiful person, somebody who's weak and almost like a rotting cadaver, which I thought was an interesting way to describe Vader. He is rotting from the inside, but what I found really interesting about the story overall was just how Piet knows fear is a motivator, and just for a brief second he thinks he has an advantage over Vader, but then the fear of Vader comes back into his life, and he goes, I can't believe I lapsed for that small moments, that I thought fear wouldn't drive me, but I know what Vader can do. I know what he's capable of, as I just watched Ozzel die, and I'm going to put that image of Vader under the helmet into a new graveyard of my memory. And that was just really, really awesome. Maggie, what did you think of this moment? I think it's probably one of the first moments in the original trilogy where we see Vader inside the mask, like that little prune guy underneath the helmet.
I really enjoyed it. I mean, I like that moment in Empire Strikes Back, so it was fun to see it from a different point of view, not to overuse that saying. And just that it's the cracks in the armor and the first moment of seeing Vader as a human and not just this man behind the machine. And so I just really liked exploring that a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm. Fear is power.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it boils down to. It's like even the most shriveled, broken man can still lead an entire people under his grip. Sarah, what did you think of this moment?
This is a story that I found to be really interesting. One, because it really started to connect some of the other stories by mentioning Torin Farr from one of the early stories. It mentioned, Ozzel. So it's really, these stories really aren't existing in a vacuum, which I appreciated about this whole book, but this story in particular. And I thought the discussion of fear and pity and what motivates him and what keeps him alive to be really fascinating. And that comment about a walking corpse was a bit jarring, but really interesting to listen to and hear about, because we all know who Darth Vader is. As a viewer, you're aware at this point, if you've seen Star Wars once or 100 million times. And so to get this idea of who Vader really is from somebody who has not seen that before and only seen his power and his might, I thought was really valuable. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, excellent story. It definitely adds a little bit. If you go back and rewatch the scene, looking at some of Piet's body movements, you can kind of infer what he's thinking just from the story, and that's just kicking us off. It's really the most valuable part of this book is you can go back and rewatch those scenes and be like, I know what you're thinking, Piet. Don't you dare think you have an advantage over Vader. You don't, sir. And it's very clear that that's the case when Vader turns around in his little swivel chair. So.
See?
Someday you're going to be wrong, and I just don't know to see it.
Punch it!
Our next story is Rendezvous Point by Jason Fry. Maggie, you mark this as one of your, I believe, one of your favorites, correct?
Yes. I'm a huge fan of Jason Fry. I love his work. And I was actually initially not really excited about this story because I have no emotional attachment to Wedge Antilles. And I know there's like a lot of Star Wars fans who like weirdly love him, and it's just never been a thing for me. And I ended up really enjoying this story. I don't know if it was just because of when I was reading it, but I laughed out loud like twice. And I think my favorite line was the maximum absorbency undergarments.
Yes.
I just love, like, you know, Star Wars makes being a pilot look so glamorous. Like, oh, you're everybody's hero. But in reality, you're like super tired. You're running on energy, like, and you stink because you've been inside the cockpit for like 24 hours. And I love that imagery. And this was like the only time that I was like, oh, I know it's on embargo, but I have to tell Jason that I like died laughing reading this.
I have to agree in the sense that this was a story that I was really not expecting to love, and I was like, oh, it's, you know, really long, you know, like I'll wait to read it tomorrow or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I started to pick up the audiobook at this point, and I was really captured by it. I, again, and like you, Maggie, am not somebody who feels super connected to Wedge, but what I really loved about this story is the nuts and bolts day-to-day feeling about it, and the way that this team kind of comes together, and they are really not very exciting at all. They
so
all
average,
suck pretty bad. They're so average, and but that's the reality of it. Not everybody, especially in a ragtag rebellion, operating, you know, outside of this government, trying to crush this empire, is gonna be the Luke Skywalker, you know, the Wedge Antilles, these great heroic pilots. And so I really, really appreciated the relationship building that happened in this story, and the ways that we saw teamwork and leadership on display, and just the ways that it functioned. You know, they got the notice from the top that, you know, Wedge was going to be promoted, and that he needed to build a team, and here's who we got, and you've just got to go. And so they worked with what they could, and I thought that was pretty admirable. And I will say, before I stop yapping, on page 156, open up your books with me, friends. Before he could find it, a protocol droid clanked up to their table. Its plating was a brilliant blue, and some bored rebel must have taken an inordinate amount of time adorning its torso with a gold Alliance starboard. I immediately thought to myself, this feels very Sabine. Feels like could be a Sabine reference. That's all I have to say. I'm putting the thought into the universe because I went, oh, interesting.
Well, she is referenced in the chapter, right? Because Wedge thinks back to fleeing Montross with Sabine and with Hobby, who we learn Hobby dies at the Battle of Hoth. Oh my god.
I was emotional.
So sad. Rest in peace, Hobby. But it's so sad to hear Wedge reminiscing on the moments that they comforted each other when Wedge was left out of the Battle of Scarif, probably a good thing. Yeah, and when Hobby was left out of Yavin, you know, it's like they were always there for each other. It's so sad. But I love, Sarah, you bring up how they're putting together this really just unlikely choice of people, and the image of them in the cramped little entryway in the closet or whatever, like, you know, on their data pads, their knees are bumping up to each other. It's such a just kind of fun, almost moment that's rooted in reality, just like things that we would probably experience. And I think that's what this book illustrates really well, is like the ordinary things of fighting the Star Wars, you know, not the things that are heroics all the time, every time, but like the smaller moments, the moments where like you are sweating, like Maggie said, you're sweating in your undergarments, you know, you're tired, you just want to eat some space food. And that was really, really fun aspect of the story. And I love how Wedge is saying, you know, in the future, they have to tell it differently to Alliance historians. And then they said, we had dozens of decorated pilots to choose from, impossible decisions. We made our choices in a lavishly appointed conference room, assisted by fancy Alliance dignitaries. And then I even joke about renaming themselves Reject Squadrons. So I love all of that. It's just loads of fun.
I also have to say, I do really appreciate the pranks.
Yes.
Really sounded so miserable. I am not a pranks girl, but I will appreciate a good prank in a book.
Yes.
But that sounded tough.
We've discussed leadership with the story, and the more humorous, the more human side of just being a pilot. Maggie, what do you feel is, for you, this being one of your favorite stories from the book, and at least from this section, what is the larger theme that you pull from it and that kind of sticks with you thinking back on the story?
I really felt friendship. For somebody who didn't really care about Wedge, I got a really quick glimpse into his emotional state when it comes to the people that he, flies out with every day, and those people that he's lost, and his connection to the people within the, the resistance with the rebels. And so I felt like there was a lot of friendship in that, in the friendships you make under duress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Sila Khat, too, is a great example of that, right? She's purposely sabotaging herself initially, and they have this really close-felt heart-to-heart moment where Wedge says, I remember every kill I had, I threw up the entire night the first time I took a life. And he says, every time I pull the trigger, I hope it's the last time. And I'm praying for a galaxy where no one has to do that anymore. But that galaxy doesn't exist yet, which means killing people. That's the reality of war. We have to protect the galaxy because no one else will. And that is a great moment of friendship, of saying, I've been there, I get it. And I think that's why Wedge is a leader, is because he's been through so much and he understands what the pilots are going through. He's not just dishing things out for the sake of being a leader. He actually understands, and there is that element of friendship too. It's not just a power dynamic at play. Do you feel that, Sarah, in terms of the essence of the story, friendship?
Yeah, I feel that, teamwork, and working together for the good of every person on that team. And I think that is respect and that is friendship. And that conversation that you mentioned is really dark. It's upsetting to read about because it really brings the reality of war in our own world a bit back into perspective. That, there is a human toll here, or in the galaxy far, far away, there is a, all kinds of species toll. And that the ideas that are happening, this is a really bare bones thing that they have to do in order to be free. And it's really kind of sad. But they're making the choices that they have to make in the moment for their own survival. And I think that's really bold and important for them to have a conversation like that.
Yeah. And it ends with Silas saying, I'm not all right, but I will be. And Wedge thinks that's two halves of the right answer. And that's just kind of the thing, right? It's okay to not be okay, but eventually we will be. And I think that was just a great moment of understanding.
And that, Lord Vader, was the last time they appeared in any of our scopes. Considering the amount of damage we've sustained, they must have been destroyed.
No, Captain. They're alive. I want every ship available to sweep the asteroid field until they are found.
The Final Order by Seth Dickinson is our next story here. Sarah, you had some interesting thoughts when I was talking to you yesterday about how this story kind of focuses on PTSD, especially around this Imperial who is this is Cannon House's story, right? This is the man, the myth, the legend, the disappearing hologram for so many years that we've wondered what the heck happened to that guy. What the heck did happen to that guy, Sarah? Why don't you kick us off?
Well, he's dead now.
Yeah.
But I mean, this story is really interesting to me, and it didn't catch for me like some of the other stories in this anthology did. But one thing that I thought was really interesting about it is that Cannon House, who has the best name, really goes back and forth between his present and his past, and remembering all of these choices he's had to make as part of this order. And I mentioned PTSD. I'm not an expert. I can't diagnose anybody. I don't know if this is, what they're trying to get at here, but it reminded me of that because he seems to be struggling with the choices he's had to make in the past and unable to live in his present because of that. And yeah, you learn about some really interesting stuff. I thought I graduated with a history degree, and one thing that I thought was really interesting, I studied a lot of the Holocaust, and there's this book by Christopher Browning called Ordinary Men, and it is about Yes. And it is about how everyday people were brought into the fold of the Nazi Party and ultimately had a role in the murder of 80,000 Jews. And pieces of that reminded me of pieces of this. And because no one, I quote from 193 and 194, or that around that is where I got this idea. There's a quote that says, "No one really hesitates." And then there is another part where it says that nobody's really holding the Imperial Navy very accountable. They're like, well, you could file this report, but like nobody's gonna actually look at it.
We'll just misplace the files. Yeah,
there's not going to actually be any justice if something goes wrong for you. And then on 192, there is a quote that says, "Terror is an instrument of the state's power." And I mean, while this story did not hit for me like some others did, I thought there were some really, really dark and real ideas happening here. And yeah, it's a tough story. But it really, clearly he's struggling.
Yeah, Maggie, what are your thoughts on that? Because I kind of agree with Sarah that while the story didn't necessarily blow me away, there are things in there that are kind of alarming in terms of what these soldiers in the Empire are actually going through and the things they've had to do and how they live with that. But also kind of having this brainwash mentality of, I serve the Empire is a greater institution than me and it's smarter and larger than me and I could not possibly know more than my superiors. Like, it's this very almost fascist like thinking and like they can't really get past, the soldier can't get past it, and he keeps living with that turmoil.
Shout out to Sarah, who is also a history major like myself.
Hey.
I do love being on podcasts with other history people, and that is exactly what I was thinking about when I was reading this. I think that I don't think humanize is the right word. So I'm just going to use that word as like a filler for whatever actual word it should be. But I think this story goes to great lengths to humanize the cogs in the wheel of the Empire, and that mentality of just like, I've made this choice. I'm involved with this now. Like, there's no point in like turning back. I've already lost everything with that one choice I made. I mean, there's reflection about his childhood and his wife and like all of this, like, looking back on what he's lost because he's become a member of the Empire. And I think that goes to, an interesting place because it's often hard to overlook what the Empire has done, and with Darth Vader and the Emperor and everybody involved in the annihilation of so many aspects of the galaxy, that you forget the people that are going along willingly. And so I think that it's really interesting to reflect on that, and I think Seth did a really good job with the story and bringing that humanity in the horror.
Yeah, horror is a great word to describe it because it also illustrates what happens when empires aren't stopped. I think that was something that really stuck out to me the most. He talked about the real purpose of the Empire. It's not about, the ranks and the insignias. It's not about any of that. It's about giving people like Vader the power to do whatever they want. And the bureaucracy allows its followers to rationalize participation through laws and protocols. So it's basically saying, this idea of like, okay, do you think for yourself and do you question your actions, or do you just say, this is the law, these are the protocols, I follow that, and that's your way of rationalizing the horrors? You're
getting a little too real
that are going on, And yeah, it did feel very rooted in our current political, age of misinformation and age of fear that we're being currently led by, not for too much longer, hopefully, and
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, but and it also made me think too towards the end of the story when he talks about the new order that will come from all of this once the rebellion's gone, and it's going to be the thing from which everything else proceeds, even truth itself, he says. So the idea of truth no longer being its own thing, but really something that stems and proceeds from the order of the Empire and is controlled by the Empire. Like Sarah said, those reports, you file them, who cares? They're going somewhere else. Doesn't matter. Who do you think's going to find them? Nobody, What do you think on that, Maggie? I know you seem to agree with me there, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I don't know if I've thought as deep as I would like to have thought on that. Because it's so relevant to right now that it's like, it's so hard to really focus on that and not then spiral.
Yeah. It was my version of doom scrolling while reading this book.
Yes.
And I did get a little too real there, but I think it really does have such a layered, even though I didn't really necessarily mark this as one of my favorite stories, I think it actually presents some of the most fascinating and almost too real ideas in this book. And that's, I think, what Seth did really well. So props to you, Seth.
You don't have to do this to impress me.
Sir, the possibility of successfully navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,720 to 1.
Never tell me the odds.
So our next story is Amarakel's Rules for TIE Pilot Survival, probably, by Django Wexler. It follows, basically, if you want to be a TIE fighter pilot, how the heck do you get by on your day-to-day life? And Maggie, you marked this as one of your favorites as well. This is a very fun story, and I'd love to hear you kick it off for us and give us the rundown of what the story's about and what you pulled from it.
Oh my gosh, I love this story. I was totally taken by surprise with this one. It had such a great tone to it. And, you know, we always, you know, as Star Wars fans joke about TIE fighters, you know, running into things and blowing up. And it happens a lot, apparently. And I love the humor that was kind of like interwoven in yet another one of these day in a life stories. And I felt like it seemed right that I liked this. And then I also liked Rendezvous Point because they both had that day in a life of a pilot feel to them. And I also love the reference of death sticks. The thing about like an angel hopped up on death sticks just absolutely cracked me up because I'm a huge fan of death sticks. And I would really love to see more of Amhara, unfortunately.
Yeah. I love that reference to Attack of the Clones feels. Sarah, what did you think of the story and the rules of being a pilot?
So this wasn't my favorite story of the bunch, but I did find it to be really interesting in some of the ideas it presented. As I mentioned off air, and I will mention again, I listened to this one on audio, and when she is doing her rules part of it, it plays like spa music, like really tranquil spa music in the background. I don't know why, but I found that to be hilarious, and I really appreciated that. And what I liked about this story is that we do get some of the insights to just how cheap the TIE fighters are and how there are Navy conscripts, and then there are some people who come from the academy. And so I thought that really was an interesting way, again, to look at how people get to be in the Empire and why they're there and why they just keep going. I also appreciated that this was an LGBT,
yes,
female loving female story, so or woman loving woman story, and I appreciated that as well.
The shower kiss.
Damn.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Is that our first shower kiss in Star Wars?
I think so.
I think so. Yeah. That's
It's
canon.
a little scandalous, but
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah, it took the Han Solo and Chewie shower scene and took it one step further, and that I love to see. I love to see that, honestly. But yeah, I love the dinginess of the TIE fighters. I love at one point Amara Kell thinks rebel ships are stupid because they have amenities like shields, armor. Who needs that? Hyperdrives? LOL, that's stupid. I just love how they're like all these things that are actually required for survival. They're like, we don't need those, and the story is called Rules for Survival. So I just thought there was some really great irony there. But I love the rules. They're don't get attached, don't be a hero, don't go at them head on, learn to love your machine, never eject. Which, by the way, the Exogorth showed up. That was a fun time. And if you're gonna get attached, make sure it's to a girl who flies like an ash angel, hopped up on death sticks. Which, Maggie, that's your favorite part. I love that too. I love that. Any other thoughts on the story, Maggie? I know, again, it's one of your favorites from the book. Anything you'd like to add to your section, or are you?
I was just so happy to see more LGBT like canon stories. And I'm sure it like probably drove some people mad on the internet.
They can stay mad.
They can stay mad.
Suck
I was
it,
so
people.
happy.
Yeah. Well, I think the authors too, they were talking about how I think Elizabeth Schaefer actually mentioned that the motto for this book was "Gain in Space." I think they said that.
I love that.
Back
love
when.
that
And that
so much.
Definitely makes
even
sense.
Hunger was like polyamorous beasts, basically, because they had like the third partner. So I do love that.
Yeah.
There were like a really good handful of stories that were, or are, they still exist, LGBTQ plus stories, and like, I really appreciate it, and it's not like I don't find it to be like in a retconny sense, but it is bringing this story, The Empire Strikes Back, from our past to our present, and I think in really positive ways. So I do appreciate every story where it is like explicitly included this romance aspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still, there's something familiar about this place. I don't know. I feel like we're being watched.
Oh, wait, put your weapon. I mean you no harm. I am wondering, why are you here?
So our next story is The First Lesson by Jim Zub, and this follows Yoda right before the arrival of Luke Skywalker on Dagobah. Now, for me, I don't think this story necessarily added a whole lot, but it was a great filler in terms of what came right before. And I love some of the mindfulness that Yoda was experiencing, and how he talks about meditation being a diffusion of yourself, reaching beyond the physical bounds that anchor us, and we attempt to understand the wider patterns at play. And I love the idea of like life is a pattern, and we have to try to understand how the pieces fit together. And that's kind of how the Force works, right? It's like taking all these things that bind us and making sense of them. But I love how Yoda, feeling the sense of Luke arriving on Dagobah, he has this flash of darkness, this disturbance in the Force. And I think it's interesting, with our next story from Mike Chen called Disturbance, I think it's interesting how these two fit back to back, and both Palpatine and Yoda feel that disturbance, and they describe it as such. Luke being woefully unprepared, very Anakin-like of him, and I love how Yoda even mentions, of course the boy had Anakin's old droid with him. Of course R2's here. Unsurprising is the cycle of life when you've lived so long. And it was just a nice filler in terms of Yoda, and the first lesson being what we find it out to be. Which, Sarah, what is the first lesson in your opinion from this story? What do you consider to be the first lesson?
I don't know. I feel like the first lesson is commitment to doing the thing. Is choosing to is to make the choice. The first lesson is making the choice to go forward in the face of uncertainty, not knowing where the outcome is going to land. And he does it. And at the end, he says, there is no try. This is the thing I'm going to do, is train Luke. And what I appreciated from this story is that I believe we talked about this a little bit, but I've read both of these anthologies back to back, so my brain is jumbled. But there are connections, I believe, to the Yoda story in the first anthology about how he uses his cane. And I thought that was pretty interesting that we connected there. Luke only sees the surface of the Force. He has not gone deeper. That reminded me of Rey in The Last Jedi, which I really appreciated. And then on page 224, we do get an Anakin and Padme mention, but Anakin is called Anakin the Fallen, and I don't know what grabbed me about that, but I wrote it in all caps, and I just think that way to characterize Anakin is very interesting, and I didn't know if we had seen something like that or that phrasing before, so I appreciated that.
Yeah, Maggie, what are your thoughts? What is the first lesson, and overall, what were your thoughts on this new perspective for Yoda?
So I'm not a huge fan of Yoda stories. So I'll be perfectly honest that I did not give this like a really thorough, deep read, because I don't know, Yoda for me is just not a character I fully relate to. I often find his backward speech quite frustrating.
I agree.
I wouldn't say that I'm like dyslexic, but I find that to be like, it makes it more difficult for me to read things, and so I was just like, oh, this is okay. But I did think that it was an interesting approach, especially with the Anakin references. I thought was a really interesting kind of deeper look at those moments in The Empire Strikes Back, and connecting the original trilogy and the prequels in a nice little, bow. but it was okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, I think the first lesson, it speaks to something Yoda says where he thinks Luke's going to find this master of great stature. And really, it's just this tiny creature. And I think the first lesson is don't let your expectations kind of unroot yourself from reality. Open your mind to the possibilities, because your Jedi master who's lived for 900 years that's going to train you might be 3'5". And that's okay, because he is strong in the Force, and we're not this crude matter. We're luminous beings. And I think that's kind of part of the first lesson.
What is thy bidding, my master?
There is a great disturbance in the Force.
I have felt it.
So, Disturbance by Mike Chen takes us into the mind of Palpatine, probably one of the most pivotal points in the entire saga, I would say. I would go as far as to say that.
Without a doubt.
Because this is really what sets forth the events of not only the end of Empire, but also Return of the Jedi. This is Palpatine's endgame. It's him learning the thing that Vader has been keeping for so long from his master. And I love that Palpatine's like Freddy Krueger. He's like, I'm infiltrating your dream, buddy. I see everything. Like, how? That's an invasion of privacy, Palpatine. That is unthoughtful of you. So unthoughtful. Maggie, what were your thoughts on Disturbance and really getting into the mind of old Palpies?
So I had a really great conversation with Mia Johnson from Dorkside. I'm a contributor over there, and she and I were talking about this story, and we were trying to figure out if there is an intentional allusion to Kylo Ren in this. Because there's stuff about like the bloodlines and looking into the future. And so I ended up looking at this story twice and trying to like delve into it at a deeper look at it. And so it's one of those stories where like, was this intentional, or am I just reading too much into this, or was it like intentionally left kind of open? And it's on like the last 2 pages where he's like looking into like Anakin's basically deceit and then what's going to happen from it. And so I don't know, this was such an interesting like mind twister, which is perfectly suited to, Palpatine.
There are some parallels. Like I think of the scene where Luke's looking out at all the Star Destroyers above Coruscant after he kills Palpatine.
Yes.
In the dream. I think of Exogorth in a way. All the Star Destroyers lined up, and I'm like, did Palpatine maybe see this vision and like kind of have his influence for his eventual order and like what he wanted to do later on? Because he saw how powerful it could be from that vision.
Yes, that bloodline.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible, and I love that it's not Darth Vader in the vision. It's actually Anakin. It's brown-robed Anakin, like with the scar on his face. And Mike Chen was very influenced by the Revenge of the Sith novelization writing this, and I love that. I don't know what the exact Easter egg is that he put in there. I know he mentioned there was like 1 or 2 of them or a couple, but it definitely gives you some pretty heavy Revenge of the Sith vibes. Sarah, what were your thoughts on Disturbance?
Yes.
Those
are my thoughts. Yep. Yes is how I felt about this book. I listened to the audio of this one, brilliantly narrated by Sam Witwer.
Ooh.
And
talk about a good time.
I really enjoyed this story, and the narration, it really made it that more eerie. And I really thought that the conversation about how the dark side is really about control and power and not symbiosis. He's like thinking that the Lightsiders are fools for, wanting to exist with the world and be connected to the Force, because why would you be connected to it when you can dominate it? And I thought that was so interesting to just hear him talk about it in that way. I also thought, in the audiobook they also do Padme's ruminations in the background, which is an immediate win for me, if you ask me. And I thought it was, dark. It was kind of hopeful. It really leaned into the prequels, which I loved. And this sentence at the end, that despite the armor and machinery, Vader's heart still beat with the fire of Anakin Skywalker, is genius. I love it. It's on 237. It's like the second to last line.
I had that written down,
I really enjoyed this story. Yeah.
That was a great quote. I do love too how the Force was personified in a way that this is something you can tame. And I love how it was made to be like a storm or like a hurricane, and Palpatine's trying to claw his way towards the eye of the storm to find the truth. and too many others would be like too fearful to go into the storm. They would turn back, and that's why the dark side is so powerful, right? Because you pave your way through that wildness. But yeah, the Vader's heart beating like Anakin's, and Palpatine sensing that this was everything Vader had ever wanted or had been taken from him. And when I read that line from Mike Chen, I thought of Anakin telling Padme, "You and I can rule the galaxy, make things the way we want them to be." And I think that was what that was alluding to, everything taken from Vader and Anakin. You know, Anakin wanted power with Padme. He wanted to, eventually rule the galaxy when he turned to the dark side. But even before that, I think he just wanted just her love, and that was it. And eventually to have their kid. And now here they are with Luke and Padme and Vader, or Anakin, and all reunited. One happy family. And it's so also tragic in a way. It's like, this is everything that was stripped away from him by not his own choice, really. I mean, by his choices, yes, but from manipulation. It was really sad.
I see it.
We do! The cave is collapsing!
No cave.
So This Is No Cave by Catherine Valenti. Finally, the Exogorth. Oh my god. What a cutie. What a baby. He just wants to eat everything and be its parent and like travel with it throughout the galaxy. And he wants to give him a nice little warm home inside his belly. And he thinks at one point, love means togetherness. It's not I, but us. But this thing is 1 billion years old, and it even mentions it was nothing but a baby in the story. And I love the idea that the Exogorth and the Exogorths, they really measure their value in terms of what they can carry with them. And it almost spoke to real people, like what we carry with us through our own lives, and the things that we flaunt and show off and experience, and the skills that we develop as kind of like our own Minox. And we show them off to the world, And I thought it was just really poetic that the Exogorth sees just so much for so long, and many others just kind of walk the great road of all moons and live and die quick, but we're all still one caravan moving together. And this was just a good heartfelt story. I don't know. It was just nice and warm and great. Sarah, I know you enjoy the story and you had something to say on it.
Yeah, so if there's one thing that I really loved about this story, it was one of my favorite things in the Star Wars, a different interpretation of the Force.
Yes.
There is nothing I love more than when we get to hear about a way that another community or another species thinks about the Force and thinks about, this bond that connects us all. And I appreciated that it, there's the hum and there's also the road of all moons. And I thought that was super interesting to hear about. Yes, Sayo is a baby, but also a really old baby. And I thought that was great. And there's also a mention about Leia being like very, very strong in the Force. And I loved that as well. But I just appreciated that this was weird Star Wars and that we got a different interpretation of the Force in this story about weird Star Wars. And 2 thumbs up for my weird Star Wars.
So the Exogorths are kind of Force sensitive in a way, or at least they travel. They almost felt like the Purgle, because I think they mentioned the hum kind of allows them to travel between planets and galaxies. So I think they're very similar to the Purgle. Maggie, will you ever watch the Exogorth reaching out for the Millennium Falcon the same ever again?
No, this was such a weird story, and I haven't yet figured out if I liked it or if I didn't like it. Because it was just so strange. And I did love the billions of years old, but still a baby. And I really do love this new trend with Star Wars of really old babies. It was just a weird story.
Yeah, it definitely is a bit different. But I will always be sad now watching that Falcon fly away and it slink back into its hole and be like, all right, well, I guess I'm sad now. So I'm going to be sad every time I watch it.
I don't know. I have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah. Watch out! It's alright. It's alright. Yeah, what I thought. Minoc. Chewie, check the rest of the ship. Make sure there are no more attached. Chewing on the power cables.
Minox.
Go on inside. We'll clean them off if there are any more.
Lord Vader Will See You Now by John Jackson Miller. Takes place aboard one of the Star Destroyers, and Ray Sloane's back. She's back.
Yeah.
Very exciting. John Jackson Miller was the first author to pen Ray Sloane in A New Dawn a long, long time ago. So this is probably one of the biggest surprises I saw when they unveiled all the different stories. I just didn't think we would get Ray Sloane in an Empire Strikes Back timeline, but like we love to see her both in Squadrons and then in this book, like within a month time frame. But my biggest takeaway from this book is really just Sloane's ability to think critically and think one step ahead. You know, she finds out that the Minox are being shot by blasters, and she brings one in named Smiley. And this is kind of how she gets her promotion to the Vigilance, which is the Star Destroyer she commands in Chuck Wendig's Aftermath book. So it almost felt like this was a bit of a setup for that later on, and really understand why she's revered in the Empire, why she's respected. And even though she made a couple of mistakes along the way, she definitely proved herself to be one of the most loyal followers of the Empire. So Maggie, what did you think of the return of Ray Sloane, and what are your thoughts on this character overall?
Oh, I'm always happy to see more of Ray Sloane. I love that character so much. I loved seeing her in Squadrons, and I was so happy to see that she was included in this book. And I will take anything that she's in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sarah, what did you think of Ray Sloane and her conniving way of going about things?
She really played Piet.
She did. She played him like a fiddle.
And I mean, this is where she tosses the space slug, or she tosses the Minoc on the ground, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, she's really doing that. She's really not messing around in this story. And we got a mention of Kanan.
Yes.
You know, and it kind of connects all of the dots while this is still fairly early in her career. And I enjoyed it. Ray Sloane, she could stomp on me. And I would say thank you.
I do love when she leaves. She says there's a body to carry out, but I don't actually think she's talking about the Minoc. I really think that's a mic drop moment to say, I just dragged Piet across the floor and wiped up his sweat with himself.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I was like, oh.
Love to see it. So, Virgins by Tracy Deonn. She is another new author. She wrote the book Legendborn, which I know got a lot of praise recently. And
read Legendborn by Tracy Deonn.
Yeah.
Do it.
The story was fantastic. The Force Cave. I mean, who would have thought? You know, we 40 years ago, we would get into the mind of this thing. But I thought it was pretty fascinating. I think the biggest four things that the Force Cave has learned over time is time, thoughts, memories, and fear. And it uses kind of all of these things to not only show people who enter the cave their previous memories, but also manipulate them in a way that makes them fearful. And the cave feeds off fear. And I thought that was just like kind of fascinating. It's like this thing that has kind of engorged itself over time and become a living sentient being based on the fear alone. But Maggie, what did you think of the Force Cave? And does it change the way you watch, or do you think it will change the way you watch that fight scene between Vader and Luke?
I don't know if it'll change the way I look at that scene. I thought this was a really interesting look at that scene. I really enjoyed the author's tone. I feel like I really looked at this book a lot for like the different styles of voice and tone, and this was one of the stories that did stand out to me that I really enjoyed, just the style.
Yeah, the style is unique because it does take different on this sort of villainous tone.
Mm-hmm.
Like the cave is almost thinking it can outsmart everybody that enters. And I think to Yoda's quote too, you know, when he tells Luke, you know, you only go in there with what you take with you. And that is the fear,
mm-hmm.
right? And that's ultimately what Luke takes in with him. So I think it changes my perspective on that slightly.
Okay.
Yoda does represent, I think, the first person to kind of outsmart the cave, and the cave describes it as a dance that they've had for so long because Yoda is the only person or being to ever enter the cave multiple times, and Yoda has always just been going in there to confront his fears. And even though he sees Ahsoka and he sees Dooku and he sees all of these memories, he understands that these are old fears, stubborn, but see them I must. My thanks you have. And I thought that was great. And I thought it was just a great lesson to confront your fears. Like, don't shy away from them because they can teach you something often. And by the end of the story, Luke is taught something about his own fear. And the cave is just so confused by that because for so long it's only thought it could get away with this. And all of a sudden it realizes that alliance is a concept it can learn. And I think the cave really learns balance. I think light and dark kind of go together. They have an alliance and one can't really overpower the other. There's like a union. And that union kind of gives hope and for the future. So Sarah, what did you think about the cave and all of its mischievous dealings?
So I really loved this story. Another great narration. I believe this one is narrated by Dion Graham. Very good. And I also want to take a moment to plug Legendborn by Tracy Dion. It is one of the books this year I am yelling off the rooftops about. It is a YA fantasy, and it's really good. It's really good.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the cave, I don't think, along with like the Exogorth, another character, or kind of a character, right, that I really never expected to learn more about. It's not something you expect to see. And again, it is weird Star Wars, and I appreciate it for its weirdness. And appreciate how much we learned about Yoda and his relationship with the cave, and the way that Obi-Wan, he interacts with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon in this story, and Obi-Wan says, take on a new Padawan, and he's like, Luke, and Yoda's like, Luke is mindless. And I was like, whoa, that's a bold statement. But Yoda really has to confront a lot of his failings, and in 900 years you have a lot of failures. And so I really appreciated that. The sentience of the cave is like very funky, but I liked how it was presented, and I again thought the writing style and the way that this cave was brought to life, I think, was really, really well constructed. And I will say, we once again have a mention on page 274, quote, "This Vader is walking death." So now he's a walking corpse and walking death. I think that is a recurring idea throughout this book that I think is just something I picked up on. I liked it.
Homeboy was having a hard time.
Homeboy, yes, he really.
Homeboy just needs some moisturizer. God,
he really struggled. He obviously, searching for Padme for a while there in the comics and things, and he's not
having a good time.
He's had a rough go.
Bounty hunters. We don't need that scum.
Yes, sir.
Those rebels won't escape us.
So Tooth and Claw by Michael Kagi. First thing I'll say up top is you're a Bosk. We find out that Bosk has a long lost sister that was raised by
straight to jail for that show. Straight to jail.
This is the wackiest story of the book. I cannot even fathom that Bosk has a sister that was raised by Chewbacca's dad. What is even happening? What is even going on?
His clan.
This was very weird fan fiction. That's all I'm going to say about this one. That is my official statement.
Holy crap. This one threw me for a loop, let me tell you. And I was like, kind of like, oh my God, everything's related in Star Wars, of course. But I also think, I tried to really dig a little deeper and understand why this story made me uncomfortable. But I do think it presented some really interesting themes. We see Bosk going after this Wookiee called Chainbreaker, who is the only other Wookiee rivaled Chewbacca as one of the most wanted out there. And it turns out Chainbreaker, who's been letting loose all of these Wookiees for so long who are enslaved, is actually a Trandoshan. And the Trandoshans and the Wookiees have a storied past. Their species have been at odds with each other for so long. They're trying to commit genocide against one another. And I love that Chainbreaker, his sister, who he finds out, is talking about how it's all been a lie this whole time. It's just been propaganda that has been used against them to really just make them go at each other's throats for no other reason than just causing chaos. And I love how she gives them a piece of like a data chip and was like, this is everything you need to know. watch this and you'll realize it's all been a lie. And it's kind of like just, I don't know what was happening. It was insane, but I will say I love the Wookiee ships that are like made out of wood and Wolfshire trees. That is just fascinating to me. And they all have jungle gyms apparently. Like, that's great. I love that. Millennium Falcon needs a jungle gym for Chewbacca.
I also appreciated that they talked about the Wookiee ships a lot. And if you look at my notes, it's like Wookiee, Chainbreaker, cool name. And then I like wrote a line. I said, actually, female Trandoshan. And then I wrote a line down and I wrote, his sister. Like, this one took me on a journey. And,
really did.
I am not a bounty hunter girl. I do not care. Like, about Bosk and Zuckuss and IG-11, or an IG-88, and also IG-11, sorry, IG-11. And Boba Fett.
Don't disrespect our boy.
Sorry. And, like, these are not characters that I care about or gravitate to in any sense of the word. But this story worked. It worked for me. I don't know what it was, but I appreciated that, like, it talked about the ways that these species see each other and how they're just wrong, and how they really need to get past their fighting in order to, like, sit down and come to the table and be like, guys, we're not doing so great here. Let's fix this. And yeah, I loved when Bosk was fighting the Wookiees, and the one older Wookiee, like, had the limp arm and then, like, totally crushed Bosk, and he totally deserved it. So I don't know what that was about this story. It was weird as heck.
Yeah.
But it worked. It worked for me. I did appreciate Itchy's full name, which is like, oh god, I listened to it in the audio. Let's see if I can reproduce it. It's Aditchiadiuk, something like that.
Damn, you speak Shriwook? I didn't know this. This could have come in handy.
Try and keep it on the DL,
You could have been translating our podcast for our Shriwook listeners this whole time.
Good job, I'm so sorry to the Wookiees that I listen to the podcast. Yeah, it's like Aditchiadiuk. But I found that I was like, oh, we're talking about Itchy, and I just thought that was really funny. So yeah, you're right. It is weird fan fiction, but sometimes weird fan fiction hits. Sometimes it doesn't.
The story actually wants me to ask you guys one question, as the idea of canon and what canon means for these sorts of anthologies. Do you take everything in these books as canon, even though, Maggie, like, you feel like it's written like fan fiction? Like, is this still going to be your canon, or do you kind of just like pick and choose the things that you're like, okay, I want that to be my canon, or do you kind of take it all at face value?
I know I personally pick and choose. I mean, for a lot of things that are quote-unquote canon for me, I still pull from Legends, from the expanded universe, because that's still my canon, and you can take that from my cold dead hands. In 70 years, when the certain point of view for The Last Jedi comes out, I will still be clutching the expanded universe to my chest. So, I mean, I take the ones that I find interesting. I mean, some of them are going to, like, obviously linger with me more, like Rendezvous and Amara and those stories. I'm going to be like, oh, I'm going to think about them the next time I watch Empire Strikes Back. But I'm not going to be thinking about Bosk.
Yeah.
He doesn't come up in my, like, regular thinking.
Yeah. I think I can say the same. And in the sense that they're all canon when I'm reading this book. But when I'm watching the movie or going back to the story at large, I'm probably not going to be thinking about many of these. But that's kind of the blessing of the anthology, is that it really presents this dynamic set of stories that you can think about while you're watching the movie. I mean, some of these stories aren't even related necessarily directly to scenes in the movie. So, you're kind of, it's expanding upon that in that way as well. So yeah, I probably also won't be thinking about Bosk, but I might be thinking about Itchy. The Wookiees. I love the Wookiees. Kashyyyk is one of my favorite planets in the Star Wars galaxy, so I appreciate Wookiee lore.
I'm more of a pick and choose sort of person as well, and I think that's kind of how I have to approach these books, because some of them are just outrageously ridiculous, but doesn't mean they're not fun. I kind of like, make my own headcanon as I go along, and that's kind of what is fun about these sorts of books.
There will be a substantial reward for the one who finds the Millennium Falcon. You are free to use any methods necessary, but I want them alive. No disintegration.
So Stet Exclamation point. This is written by Daniel Jose Older. Love to see him involved in this project, just ahead of the High Republic. Maggie, this was one of your favorites, and I know obviously you're an editor, you're a writer, you love writing. So I'm a journalism major, quote unquote, but I did a lot of journalism in college, so I kind of felt the same. I love this story and just some of the editorial blurbs that were in there about, take this out, thanks. And it's kind of very passive aggressive, this editor.
So passive aggressive. I loved it. The entire time it reminded me of, do you remember the little paper clip from Microsoft Word? I kept picturing
Clippy.
Yes, Clippy. But I just love the formatting. I there was another one earlier in the book that was like the 1-page comic. And so I loved flipping through the book and seeing these very different styles. And so when I started seeing these little editorial notes as I was like flipping through to see what to expect, I was like, ooh, this one's going to be my favorite. And I just loved it because TK7 had such an interesting, like you said, passive aggressive tone. My favorite is on the last page where the narrator is like, and I smile. And TK7 is like, call the office right now. I just love that.
Yeah, this is a chaos story if I've ever read one. Because you see in the notes, I believe that someone has sliced into our main server and posted this story with all my edits. So what's going on? So that gets a little chaotic and probably get a little hectic for the paper. We mentioned High Republic on page 308. There is a great hyperspace disaster mention, and I went, oh. I get my little light bulb popped up there. I will say that this is another really, really fun one to listen to on the audio because it is narrated. It is dually narrated, and the way that the TK7 character comes in and does these edits in audio is exactly that passive aggressive. She's like, thanks, delete this, thanks.
Delete that part about us getting bribed, thanks.
or delete every single mention of Grandpa. So I thought this one to be pretty fun. I don't really think that Parazine has quite, this story doesn't quite have a ton of journalistic flow to me. I don't know. It feels a little rough. It feels like he might need some more experience. For me, at least.
He might need an internship or two, yeah.
This is his internship. But I really did find it to be fun, although not one that will stick with me for the long term because I was kind of confused about elements in it. Will not lie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was a bit lost with some of the plot, so I don't think it necessarily landed in terms of the content. But to Maggie's point, I think what the story did well is do it different. It didn't just give us a story, it gave us a unique style so that when you are flipping through, you go, oh, what's the story? Why is there stuff in the margins? And you read it and it sticks out. And I think anytime you can push the writing medium and do it a little different, this is the chance to do that in these sorts of books. Don't just go with the standard stuff. Take a risk, try something new, unique, that sort of thing. And yes, Sarah, High Republic mention about the moons getting blown up 2 centuries ago in the Great Hyperspace Disaster. This is a canon thing that happened that we will learn about. And why did the Great Disaster not only fling contents of these ships across the galaxy, but also destroy moons? That's kind of terrifying to think about. And I'm very excited to learn more about it. So
You have your moments. Not many of them, but you do have them.
next up, we got Wait For It by Zoraida Cordova. So this is a Boba Fett story. I love to see women writing Boba Fett. There's been just some serious controversy, rightly so, this year around the Boba Fett character in relation to pretty awful comics that have come out that are just
terrible,
are just really bad. And I won't even talk really about what they go on with, but
just don't read them.
Yeah, just don't read them. Just don't read the new Bounty Hunter comic line. No offense, but it's not great. I was really happy to see her write this, especially because she just wrote the Asajj Ventress story in Clone Wars Stories of Light and Dark. And there was a little bit of Boba in that as well. So I'm actually not surprised she wrote this. And I'm really happy to see her. It almost feels like a sequel to that little mini story. And I think she writes Boba Fett really well. I think it really blends the child in Boba Fett with the adult. And it almost felt like the entire story was him trying to be this total badass, but really inside he's still that young kid.
So not.
Yeah, he's still that like young baby boy, that kid lashing out because he lost his dad. And the reason he never misses his target is because every target will and would always be the Jedi who got away. And I freaking loved that line. It was so good. But I will say the boy needs some therapy ASAP. Maybe by sitting in the Sarlacc pit for a bit. He had I always think of Robot Chicken when he sits in the Sarlacc with a Trandoshan, I believe. There's a guy sitting in there with him, and they talk a little bit, and they're having like one-to-one. They're like painting each other's nails and stuff, and they're at some point he jetpacks out of there. So I'd like to think that maybe he made a friend or two in there, where we end up seeing him later on in Star Wars. But Sarah, you seem like you really want to say some stuff here about Boba Fett. You're holding a note card up.
I'm sitting with my note card. I will just quickly say that on page 318, Zoraida writes Lord Hufflepuff about Lord Vader. 10 out of 10. Zoraida, thank you. Just thank you.
I want that on a t-shirt.
Let's do it. Let's make it happen. Yeah, I'm not like a Boba Fett like huge fan or anything, but I really appreciated the story. Thought it was really interesting. He says he's successful because he knows people. I thought it was really interesting. Again, this one is narrated by John Hamm. He narrated the Boba Fett story in the first anthology, so he came back to do the Boba Fett story in this one. He does a good Boba Fett. I appreciate his narration. That's all I have to say about this one.
I'm so happy, Maggie, Zoraida, that John Hamm got to say your name. Just saying, that's awesome. Maggie, what did you think of the story?
So I'm not a Boba Fett fan. On the Star Wars Friends podcast, there's 3 out of 5 that are huge Boba Fett fans, and it's kind of obnoxious in an endearing way. So I was kind of like, Boba Fett. So I actually really ended up enjoying this. I thought, like you said, Brad, the way that she presented Boba Fett as the child that has kind of grown into this very resentful man hits like all of my like appeal buttons. So I was like, okay, you've finally convinced me to like this character. And I think that's something that only female authors are capable of tapping into, because I have yet to see like a male author writing Boba Fett that doesn't just lean hard into like the badass and like fails to recognize that he is a child who went through extreme trauma and never let go of that, much like most Mandalorians do, even though he's not actually a Mandalorian. Sidebar. So I really enjoyed. Yeah, I'm gonna be Din here for a moment. He is not a Mandalorian, but I thought that the way that she approached his character gave him so much more depth than we have previously seen, and I can actually see how people could like this character. I don't know if anybody else is like the same way, but I cannot hear or read Boba Fett saying "as you wish" and not picture the Princess Bride, which then like constantly makes me think of the "you've killed my father."
Oh my gosh.
So I don't know. I saw a TikTok the other day with that, and like it's just been on my mind for a very long time. So I actually like this was another one of those like surprising stories for me.
I think you hit the nail on the head. You said it perfectly. Zoraida made people understand why Boba is likable, and you're totally right in saying that's the difference between a man and a woman writing this character, because I feel like for so long men have just written this character as he kills because he likes to kill. He's a bad boy. And what Zoraida's was like, okay, yeah, he kills and he gets his mark, but why? So Zoraida took it one step further and was like, but why? Why does he act this way? Why does he do these things? And for so long, people just don't understand why. And I think that's why people hate Boba Fett or tend to not like him, is because we've never really understood the why or what's behind the mask. And we learn Boba sees himself as the orphan who shared a face with a million others. He's the only person he could trust because he was his own father. He's his father. He's literally his father's face. And now he's older than his dad. That's so sad. That's so sad that he's his dad and he's older than his dad. There's a lot going on there with Boba's psyche. And I think that was really fascinating to explore. There's more to him than just killing. And the more complex Star Wars characters become, the better. And give Zoraida a Boba Fett book. I'm just saying. Let's do it.
Before we jump, I do just want to say that I have read the Stories of Light and Dark, then the first From a Certain Point of View anthology, and then the second From a Certain Point of View anthology, all essentially in a row in the past couple of weeks. And I do feel like I've learned a ton about Boba Fett, you know, because he is mentioned in all kind of 3 of these different projects. And I feel like I've definitely gained insight on him, mainly written by Zoraida, that has been really wonderful and given me a new perspective. Because Brad, I know you really like this character, and I have always been like, but why? And I'm getting some of the but why, and I appreciate that.
Go back and stand by the manual release for the landing claw.
I really don't see how that is going to help. Surrender is a perfectly acceptable alternative in extreme circumstances. The Empire may be gracious enough.
Thank you.
What do you have in mind for your next move?
Well, if they follow standard Imperial procedure, they'll dump their garbage before they go to light speed, and then we just float away.
The rest of the garbage. Then what?
Then we gotta find a safe port somewhere around here.
So our next story is Standard Imperial Procedure by Sarwat Chadha. This follows the character Ashen, who has went from the head of engineering down to the lowly demands of the Star Destroyers, and he has lost his bonus. He is just miserable. He's kind of like Chevy Chase in A Christmas Vacation. He's like, he knows he's not going to get his bonus to put in his swimming pool, but he's just kind of like, screw it, I'm going to kidnap my boss. So, and he tries to do that with Han Solo. He tries to one-up everybody and get his last score and get the heck out of Dodge. And then Boba Fett shows up with the best version of Dexter's surprise mother effer I've ever seen. Like, truly, I was just terrified when he turned around and I was just reading and I was scared to see that happen. But this was a really interesting story in terms of the ending and just watching the tragedy of this guy float away with the trash. That was kind of sad that he's going to spend the rest of his life in the stars after having looked up at them for so long. And that's just, oh, damn, that hit me hard. Maggie, what did you think of Standard Imperial Procedure?
I thought, like, a lot of what you just said, really. I was very sad about the end of it, and I really love these stories that make me feel for characters and things that I otherwise wouldn't put so much emotion into.
Mm-hmm. I feel like he got a happier ending than just sitting there doing his job forever, because he was very miserable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was almost like he followed his dreams. He wanted to be in space, and he ended up there, so, you know.
Don't we all?
Yeah. Sarah, what did you think?
I thought that this was an interesting story, but at the end of the day, I literally wrote, this is depresso. Which is, I mean,
it's very depresso.
Where we're hitting on here. But this story really, and I don't say this in a negative way, but it really sucked for our main character. And I wrote, wait, this is major sad. And like that was my takeaway from it, and I thought it was interesting that we got, if anything, you know, more insight to the day-to-day, how all of the lowlifes get the, you know, the crap food, and then you go over the officers and you can see their tables, you can see where they're eating, and they get, you know, anything you can order.
That was a great moment.
Yeah, all the delicacies you can think of, and I was like, ooh, this is uncomfortable. This whole thing is uncomfortable. So yeah. Boba Fett really played him. Did he deserve it? I don't know if he deserved it.
Yeah, it is definitely a sad boy story for sure. And to close out here, we're gonna move on to our last sad boy story, and I have a feeling we're gonna spend a little bit of time on this one.
Even Yoda cannot see their fate.
But I can help them. I feel the Force.
But you cannot control it. This is a dangerous time for you, when you will be tempted by the dark side of the Force.
Yes. To Obi-Wan you listen. The cave. Remember your failure at the cave.
But I've learned so much since then. Master Yoda, I promise to return and finish what I've begun. You have my word.
It It is you and your abilities the Emperor wants. That is why your friends are made to suffer.
That's why I have to go.
Luke, I don't want to lose you to the Emperor the way I lost Vader.
There is Always Another by Mackenzie Lee. What I will say up top, this is probably one of my favorite stories in the book. I think this is everything I expect the Kenobi series to be. Everything that was written in here, every single bit of it was great information, great insight to what Obi-Wan has gone through. He realizes that just so much of his past has been wrong following the Jedi Creed, and it's kind of led him astray. And these are things that he's already come to the conclusions for. It's just that now we're finally seeing Obi-Wan kind of come to terms with that, because we really haven't been able to see that. And I'll get more into it, but Maggie, I'd love to hear your thoughts about Obi-Wan. Do you think that this is really the tone of what the Kenobi series is going to take on in terms of living with regret and failure? And what do you feel that you learned about Obi-Wan through the story?
I really hope that this is the tone that the Obi-Wan series is going to take, because I really enjoyed this. I also really enjoyed page 346, when he's like, the Anakin's making me crazy thing. And he's like, surely I never annoyed Qui-Gon Jinn this much. And I love these reflections, and I am like an unabashed fan of Qui-Gon Jinn. So anytime I get a reference of him, I'm going to be very happy. So I also really enjoyed this story. And there's so much in his tone, and I could hear both Ewan McGregor's voice and Alec Guinness's voice while reading this, which I thought was really interesting, because obviously they both have very different styles of speaking, but they're obviously the same character. So it was really nice to see a lot of turn of phrases that fit both characters, both iterations of the character so well. And so I really think, yet again, you have a female author just absolutely killing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will echo that moment where Qui-Gon is mentioned. I was like, honey, you really tested Qui-Gon there. I mean, like,
so often.
Like, you
just read Master and Apprentice.
Yeah, you are not a saint. There's also another quote on 349 where he says, I don't know why I'm defending Anakin, even in my own head, especially after he killed me. Old habits. And I just appreciated that because he still has, there's still a lot of love there, even if it's strained, and he can't get rid of his care for Anakin, even though he's gone down this path that he so clearly disagrees with. I also appreciated on 342, speaking of Qui-Gon, there is a moment where he said that he really followed the code, and he kind of internalized it in a certain way, the literal meaning of it rather than the spirit of it. And Qui-Gon essentially said, embody the spirit of it. And he kind of told him to live his life and like love, like, because there's a moment where it says I only had to think about touching Siri Tachi's hand under the table at the midday meal as to feel as though I deserved a punishment handed down from the council. And I thought that was really interesting. One, we do not know the gender of Siri Tachi. That's like, I feel like that's the first time we've ever heard that name, so I'm wrong on that. Let me know. And I appreciated that Qui-Gon was like, actually, just do it. Like, you're fine. Because
Qui-Gon's an enabler.
Yeah, but Qui-Gon lived his own life too, and we learned that in Master and Apprentice. And so I really appreciated that. And then he goes, yeah, I certainly never annoyed Qui-Gon this much. And it's like, look 3 pages back, buddy. Like, you really did. Also on 350, he says, the dumb, beautiful son of my dumb, beautiful friend. And I'm like, wow, Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
God bless. Like, that
he's pretty
just great.
sassy in this story for sure.
And he's clearly like sad nostalgic in reminiscing in this way that is painful but hopeful at the same time. And I really did love this story, and I was surprised by it because I haven't read any of this author's work. I've only heard her name brought up in like newsy, not so great like context, so I didn't know what to expect, and I was really positively surprised by it.
there's two things I'd like to touch on before we close out the discussion, but I think the two things that really stuck out in this story were the Skywalkers and Obi-Wan himself. And like why his fate was so intertwined with the Skywalkers, why he couldn't turn away no matter how much they failed and how much drama they cause. Like he even says to literally start the story, I hoped dying would be enough to untangle me from the Skywalkers' family issues. Yet he still keeps coming back. Obi-Wan, you don't have to show up to Dagobah. You don't have to try to save Luke. But why do you? Why does he keep coming back? Why can he say that the Skywalkers are wildfires, their passions scorching the dirt as soon as they're given a spark? Leia could even set the whole Empire on fire with a wet match. Like, that's such a great quote. And they talk about how his life and death would be easier if the Skywalkers didn't care so damn much. Maggie, why do you think that no matter how much drama, how stir crazy the Skywalkers make Obi-Wan, no matter how much he wonders, why did I even come? This kid is just as stubborn as his father. Why couldn't Padme be the chosen one? Like, why all these things? Yet he still always returns to try to right the Skywalker's path.
I think, not to reference the Lego Star Wars movie, but I think it's that connection there, despite, the Jedi way being to not form connections, all of the masters and apprentices have had these deep bonds. And I think for Obi-Wan, there's a connection there that can't be severed, and it moves from Anakin into Luke into the entire line of the Skywalkers, and that care is always going to be there. And so I think that's why no matter how crazy Anakin or Luke drives Obi-Wan up the wall, he still cares, and he still cares about their fate.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. It's the you're my brother, Anakin. There's so much more to it, and I think a lot of the story involves Obi-Wan realizing that he kind of lived by this Jedi language that by the end of this chapter he realizes is hollow and untrue, as he refers to it, and it's only ever led him down volcanic embankments and barren dunes. And he kind of gets almost mad at Yoda. He almost wants to lash out at Yoda to say, like,
be mad at Yoda.
Yeah, right? Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, I wouldn't think Obi-Wan would get here, yet he is. And I think he realizes, like, you guys, as much as I played a part in this, all of you did too. You tried, you plopped him at the bottom of an impossible mountain. And and Obi-Wan recognizes how wrong this was. And you tried to make him fit into a mold that never fit. And it says you can only be pushed and pulled and reformed so much before you break. And I think Obi-Wan in all of his years on Tatooine realizes what they did to Anakin, what they put on him by being the chosen one, what they did by going to Tatooine to rescue him, but not actually rescue him from freedom. They just took him from one form of restraint and put him in another set of restraints by the Jedi Order, And that's
then cut all of his pre-existing connections, kept him from his mother, caused his mother to die, all of these things that just set him up for failure.
Yes.
And I think Obi-Wan feels a lot of guilt because there's so many different choices he could have made if he hadn't been so bound by the Jedi way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it says a childhood abandonment resulting him in clinging with white knuckles to whoever was nearest to him. First he lost Shmi.
Cough, Padme.
Then he lost Padme. Then he lost Ahsoka. Then he lost Qui-Gon. Then he lost Obi-Wan. He lost everything. And that's what Obi-Wan sit and stirred with for so many years on Tatooine. He says he had too much time for, quote, agonizing self-reflection, dismantling the systemic rituals and ingrained thought patterns that led you to playing an inadvertent yet critical role in the establishment of the Galactic Empire and the painful task of forgiving yourself and everyone else. Damn. He lost Anakin to a needless war, to a wild heart, to a doomed prophecy. That's some deep shit right there. Sarah, final thoughts on that. I want to know what you think of kind of what me and Maggie just bounced back and forth and just the Obi-Wan feels. This is what the Kenobi series is going to be. It's incredible.
Yeah, I really think that, I don't know if I have much to add with what you guys talking about. I'm just sitting here and like, yeah, nodding. But I do hope we get more of this. I hope this is what the Kenobi series is all about. And I hope we really dive into that pain. I hope it hurts. And I say that with the most care and respect for the character because I think in order to have a good series in the future, we really have to dive into him and really understand the level of pain that he went through himself, and the responsibility that was tossed upon him by Qui-Gon and by the whole Jedi Order, but also by those around him who died or left too early or made poor choices. And the fact that he lives so strictly to this order and is now finding fault in it. And it's all really powerful. I think it's really, really interesting, deep divey stuff. And I hope that we get this. I hope that we get this and not something that is a lot lighter or shallow, because I think Kenobi deserves this level of depth.
Yep.
In all his stories.
Last thing I will add is he did mention, he threw a Bail Organa mention in there. He said Bail sent him updates on Leia in all of his years on Tatooine. Just saying.
I do love a Bail Organa mention.
Just saying.
That's why this story was great. No other reason. Just the Bail Organa mention. Thank you.
Her mother would have been proud. And last thing to close out here is Obi-Wan spent years and years in that tiny sand cell on Tatooine, sweating and perpetually dehydrated with nothing to do but relive everything I could have done differently, and then slowly let each one go, trying to make peace with losing. The greatest teacher failure is, and that's tragedy, and I can't wait for the Kenobi series. So that is it. That is all the stories. We just did it. We did the thing. And I'm so excited. Maggie, thank you for joining us. I want to ask you final thoughts on From a Certain Point of View. Sarah and I are going to give ours in the next episode. What are your final thoughts on the book?
I really enjoyed it. I just loved it. I didn't know what to expect because I remember the mixed reviews of the first anthology, which I enjoyed, but a lot of people didn't seem to enjoy the like goofy, whimsical style of these anthologies, and I feel like it is the perfect pick-me-up in a really weird 2020, and keep Star Wars weird, keep Star Wars goofy, and just keep Star Wars fun.
Absolutely.
And that's what this book does.
I love all of that.
I totally agree.
Yes. So Maggie, where can our listeners find you online? What do you have that you want to promote, and etc.? All the good things that are going on in your life right now.
I am all over the place. So you can find me on Twitter at Maggie of the Town. You can find me over at Your Money Geek, writing about all things geeky. And then you can find me over on YouTube at youtube.com/C/Let's Talk About Star Wars. I have new updates every Sunday. I take topic requests. I do all sorts of fun stuff. And then I'm also over on the Star Wars Friends podcast. And I do live streams every Saturday with the Geeky Waffle, Candace over there. If you are unaware of the Trans Rights Are Human Rights fundraiser, that is still going on. Candace and Eric and I are running that until December 20th, and our goal is $15,000, and we are almost there.
Incredible. And we will link that fundraiser in the description of this episode. So if you have the means to donate, please do so. If you have the means to just share it, which everybody has the means to share it for the most part, do that as well. It's a great thing that you guys have done. I really think it's brought the Star Wars community together even closer. And even though we often find ourselves fighting hatred and fighting some just horrible things, from certain people in the franchise, I think the opportunity to rise up against that is like the most Star Warsian thing we could do, because there are more of us. As much as I might dislike The Rise of Skywalker, that is one of the best Star Wars.
Line.
That's one of the best Star Wars quotes out there, truly. And thank you guys for what you do.
Thank you. I cannot begin to express how happy I have been to see the Star Wars fandom really rally around this, and not just Star Wars fans, but Star Wars creators and so many people at Lucasfilm that have both publicly and privately reached out. It has been a truly humbling and just like unbelievable experience.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Maggie, thank you once again for sticking with us through this grueling process, but I think we had a lot of fun here, and it definitely heightened our appreciation for each of these stories. So for all of you listening, stay tuned for part 3 coming soon with Brandon Winerdy from Talking Bay 94. He's going to close us out with all sort of Cloud City shenanigans. So until then, everybody, may the Force be with you.
Friends of the Force is a proud member of the Star Wars Escape Pods network. To learn more about our sister shows, find us on Twitter at We Are Escape Pods. The Star Wars Escape Pods network, promoting positivity in fandom.